I don't think I'm likely to get more excited about a genre combination than I was about the unlikely marriage of stealth and 3D platforming that makes up the DNA of Ereban Shadow Legacy. Both light-based stealth and 3D platforming have been heavily snubbed over the years, though the latter is heading into a bit of a renaissance at the moment, thank God. And combining the need for careful traversal between light and shadow with the timing and dexterity a platformer demands felt like a match made in heaven. Unfortunately, while I don't think the design of Ereban Shadow Legacy quite lives up to the promise of its premise, there's a flawed but fun game here that might just be worth checking out. Before I get into that though, allow me to point out that it's definitely worth checking out our Patreon at the link below if you care about supporting honest coverage of the latest and greatest indies. Doing so will net you some cool perks too, like free games depending on your membership tier, exclusive live streams, and access to our fabulously wholesome Discord community. Ereban Shadow Legacy is, well, let's be honest, the title alone is enough of a generic fantasy-sounding thing that it may not turn many heads. That said, its premise did begin with some potential. You play as Ayana, the last of her people, the ever-so-mysterious Ereban, whose abilities allowed them to blend into the shadows by quite literally diving into them like a Splatoon character that never got past her emo phase. Very early in the game, Ayana forcefully parts way with Helios, a shady energy corporation whose motivations around recruiting her were perhaps a wee bit suspicious. With the help of some other Helios haters, Ayana heads out into the world to learn the truth about her people and whatever it is that Helios is hiding. The story of Ereban is by no means bad, but I'd recommend against considering it the main draw. The writing is arguably the biggest issue, being full of stilted dialogue brimming with lore-specific jargon that made it easy to lose track of what was going on. It wasn't long into the game before I realized I really knew why I was where I was or why I was doing what I was doing, but as long as I followed my friendly little waypoints, there wasn't much reason to care. It's a story that exists unobtrusively if you want to follow it or not. Gameplay is the meat of what Ereban has to offer, so let's get into that. First, the stealth. Most of your time in Ereban will be spent trying to reach a particular waypoint without getting caught by human or robotic guards that stand in your way. Killing or incapacitating them is simply a matter of sneaking up behind them quietly enough and pressing X, but there are other variables to consider. There's no option to incapacitate human enemies, for example, only kill them, and doing so will lower your morality, which supposedly has impacts later in the game. Though even after finishing, I'm still not quite sure what the morality meter had to do with the ending, which seemed like a pretty simplistic set of 3 different choices. Robots, conversely, can only be incapacitated, but unless you use a very limited ability that lets you hide the bodies, their friends can discover and, in some cases, revive them. I wouldn't call the enemies in Ereban especially smart, as there were plenty of times I took out one of their brethren firmly enough within their field of view that I would have thought they'd notice, and if they do notice you, getting out of sight and forgotten is generally pretty easy, but they react appropriately to seeing you, investigate the area, always pursue if you're careless enough to be caught, and generally don't do anything especially dumb either. Unfortunately though, at least in the first half of the game, carelessness is just about the only way you are going to get caught, because while Ereban's stealth mechanics are perfectly competent, the amount of leeway Ayana is given by her ability to swim in the shadows to evade detection is, let's say, more than a little generous. You can't stay in the shadows forever, as a Breath of the Wild-esque meter will indicate your energy draining and needing to recharge if you stay in them too long. This meter takes several seconds to drain and not much time to recharge, making it virtually never a problem when I was trying to remain unseen. As a result, most of Ereban's stealth is almost trivially easy, to the point where very little effort would allow me to manipulate the shadows and the AI to take out 2 or 3 enemies in a row. Now, is doing so kind of satisfying and badass in a way? Totally. But when you can do it for large chunks of the game, it threatens to trivialize many of its own gameplay systems. Let's talk about upgrades, for example. Ayana has a skill tree that she can build out by collecting shadow orbs throughout the environment, and similar collectible gear exists to be able to upgrade your gadgets at workbenches or craft ammo for them. There's a pretty good variety of these, from stun bombs to decoy gloves to various sonar devices that let you scan the area for enemies and collectibles or plan your infiltration through enemy territory. Upgrades are similarly interesting, with skills that allow you to hide enemy bodies or make your way out of an enemy's grip if you happen to get caught. The design of these gadgets and upgrades isn't necessarily the problem. They are fairly interesting and do their part to add some variety to Ayana's moveset. The problem is twofold. One being that some of these gadgets are extremely limited in use, with higher resource requirements to craft their ammunition. And the second being that it won't really matter because all the gadgets do is make an already easy stealth system even easier. The result was that I constantly forgot most of the gadgets and skills were there, and when I actually decided to use them, they turned the difficulty from easy to utterly trivial. This applies especially to the first half of the game, which favors large, open environments to explore as opposed to tighter, more restrictive corridors. While open-ended level design isn't usually a red flag unless Ubisoft has something to do with it, in Ereban's case it sadly results in its weakest levels being front-loaded. Because the tricky thing about open environments is that exploring them needs to be interesting, and in Ereban's case they tend to just be big, full of similar looking buildings, even more similar looking enemies, and multiple easy ways to get to the similarly easy objectives. The stakes in these levels feel especially low, and the incentive to explore just wasn't there, be it for a page of middling lore or rarely necessary crafting and upgrade components. There is another element to the game though, as I mentioned earlier, which is the platforming. While there are moments later on where you have to time a jump right or navigate between moving shadows in a way that evokes traditional platformers, actual platforming challenges are fairly rare in its first half. You're mostly just swimming through shadows to climb buildings or sneak up on enemies, and rarely do so in a way that demands clever utilization of your moveset. Later areas employ more linear level design that pushes you down a certain path and litters platforming challenges and some interesting puzzles on the way. Ereban works when it maintains that level of focus, and it's a shame that it takes so long to get there. There were also a few annoying bugs, but oddly enough, they, like my other issues, seemed mostly restricted to the first half of the game, like the time I turned into a shadow but actually fell through the game world, or the time I accidentally shadow swam into a wind turbine and had to randomly jump around inside of it until the game saw fit to let me out. The most bizarre issue I experienced, however, was when I tried to play Ereban on my desktop PC and it only ran in slow motion at about half speed even after restarting. Admittedly, I kind of gave up and settled for playing it on my laptop, but a very strange bug nevertheless. Playing it on my laptop with an RTX 4060 or on the Steam Deck where it runs quite well through Proton was all great. Ereban's visuals employ a cel-shaded look that I generally enjoyed, and some sections of the game were quite pretty. That said, most other sections suffered from more than a bit of blandness, with some repetitive and uninspired environmental design and similarly basic looking enemies that didn't have a lot of variety. It also comes with a bit of a stutter, albeit one that I tended to stop noticing after the first few minutes of each play session. Thankfully, the game has a full suite of graphical settings covering texture quality, draw distance, fog, upscaling, and a variety of others. It has a couple of accessibility options too, just the ability to change the font size and text backgrounds, as well as indicate if you want any hints or how much guidance you'd like in-game. Sound design is similarly just kind of fine. Ayana's voice actress does a great job of bringing the character to life with the right amount of snarkiness to not make the game overly serious. Other voice acting is a mixed bag, though I did enjoy how the enemy sentries would talk to each other, announcing their tone at the beginning of each sentence by saying something like, "proud reassurance," or "sympathetic hand on shoulder." For as much as I felt Ereban's plot didn't stick the landing, these moments of levity are welcome. The music in the game was completely just there, and I have virtually no opinion on it beyond my lack of opinion on it, if that makes sense. It fit the game fine, but I forgot about it pretty much the moment I turned it off. Getting through Ereban Shadow Legacy took me just under 6 hours. You could certainly lengthen the playtime of Ereban considerably, but for the most part, I do suspect repetition would set in first. Because while the level design does start to improve the closer you get to the end of the game, the stealth never evolves in any meaningful way, remaining mostly quite simple and easy whether you built out the skill tree or not. Overall though, I ended Ereban with mixed opinions, leaning slightly toward good. I love the concept, I really do, and the execution is certainly not bad, especially for the team's first release, but at times it reminded me, quality-wise at least, of the very first Assassin's Creed game. A game with some interesting, unique ideas that were left mostly unexplored until the sequel came along and delivered on the original's promises. And I really hope Ereban gets a sequel, because there is a lot that could be built on here, and I don't mean that as an insult. It's easy to get through and certainly tries to incorporate some unique ideas, but for me, I felt like the execution is only about 2/3 there, and I can't help but wonder what could have been with more consistently focused level design and a more compelling difficulty curve. For fans of platformers and stealth games, or those just looking for something different, Ereban Shadow Legacy isn't going to blow your mind, but especially on sale, fans of those genres may want to give it a look.
How do you expect me to trust you?
I know you have questions, but this frequency isn't safe.